Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast featuring Kate Riga. I guess today is literally the 100th day of the second Trump administration. Everybody's been kind of talking about it for the last 3 or 4 days, is that we're at 100, at the 100 days, but this is actually the day. So we are going to devote, significant amount of this episode to kind of taking stock, but also taking stock of the taking stocks, basically. And then we're going to, talk about, sort of we are in the era now in which, as is often the case with Trump, that everything is a permutation of Trump, right? We're going to talk about his first 100 days in office. We're going to talk about what scale of economic shocks or recessions he has created on his own, um, for for no particular reason, and also this ominous development that I think everybody's seen in Wisconsin, where the administration arrested a local judge, local, state judge, not federal judge, for notionally impeding the work of ICE, which, according to their claim, seems to be basically that she told him, kind of said, "Hey, you can take this door; it's cool." And that door was not the door that led them directly to the ICE agents. So I think we get what is going on there. In any case, though, Kate, we've seen all of these. We've seen all of the 100 days stuff, um, and one of the things that has at least shaped some of the 100 days coverage, for better or worse, is that, as we would expect, every big news organization that does a premium poll has done one for this, and they've come out all pretty bad for the president. They show him, uh, about 10 points down in public support from where he started, which was, kind of just perhaps over 50%, and now down low 40s, even down to 39 in a couple cases, and disapproval ranging from the mid 50s up to almost 60. So that has shaped the coverage, and we have this, you know, odd split screen where you have that kind of, fairly negative coverage combined with the media tour from the White House, which is, everybody agrees this is the best 100 days that has ever happened in American. And it's a funny kind of thing, a very Trump kind of moment. What's your take? What are you seeing at 100 days?
I mean, the polling has been pretty illuminating. He has either the worst or the second worst kind of aggregate at this point. And if he's second worst, it's only after his first term. So, and within a lot of that, you're seeing movement, particularly from some of the demographic shifts, the much ballyhooed demographic shifts. For instance, it seems like young people are back to being quite negative on Trump. Elliot Morris, the old 538 guy, had a write up about this, basically saying, his theory is kind of these people were never super MAGA. It's just these young people are disaffected, have kind of come of age in a time where, the economy is fucked up, can't afford a house, crushing student debt, et cetera, and perhaps are just a super thermostatic group, are going to always kind of be anti-incumbency to some degree. And if the economic well-being is the kind of current biggest driver for that group, it would make sense that as soon as Trump starts messing around with tariffs, they're not ideologically bound to him in any kind of profound way, and then they swing back the other day. So that's kind of his take on it, which seems plausible to me. But overall, I think it's hard to kind of separate out the economic stuff from the polling stuff because they seem so intrinsically bound, right? Like Trump's kind of golden attribute throughout all the rest of the chaos has been people think he's this great businessman and that he will kind of masterfully steer the economy, which is why it was always insane, the tariffs thing. It was, and he did these interviews in the last few days, one with Time, one somewhere else, and he said something that was true. He was like, I ran on the tariffs. Like people knew I was going to do them. And it's like he did run on them. He said he was going to do them all the time. People just didn't believe him because it was so inscrutable and so self-destructive, right? So, I mean, and we're still at a place where I think we're a few weeks out from really tangible benefits. And I think you're seeing that on a lot of these kind of economic indicators where there are still a lot of components of the strong, Biden economy. And then there's like a pal over top of, heinous consumer confidence and, the first contraction in growth since 2022. So, it's just, I think those things are playing in pretty heavily. And of course, dinging him on what was his best indicator. So, of course that's kind of dragging him down. And in some polls, he's as low as the kind of low 40s, high 30s. So yeah,
And
I mean it's
even worse on the economy.
yeah.
Like he's I think consistently in the 30s on the economy. You know, it's one of the things about political realignments that often you look historically, often you have an election where you have something like what we saw, where you have not just one party does better one election over the other, that's standard, but where you see key constituencies move, which you did to some significant or at least meaningful extent in this last election. And realignments are made when, in a sort of a personalizing sense, a constituency sort of takes a chance on a new person, sometimes for very contingent reasons, and then the president kind of seals that deal, right, through subsequent action. And often it's hard to tease apart. Well, when it works, maybe it's because there was some like really fundamental thing happening in that constituency, versus it was always kind of fluff and it was going to bounce back. Um, but with what you described here, with sort of, I think we say young people with a more multiracial component than we're used to seeing with Republicans. You mentioned all those things about, the economy and all the things that have factored into the disaffected and anti-incumbent tendencies of young voters today. You also have a lot of the things you described are parts of the COVID pandemic, but there's just the chaos of the COVID pandemic and the sort of, I'm not sure it's quite right to say the political radicalization on both sides, but there has been uh, the pandemic overlapped, accelerated more ideological turns on both sides. We know it was already happening with MAGA. We know that story, but there's also it. It's also worthwhile to step back from, most listeners to this podcast are going to be, broadly part of the Democratic coalition. Um, that you have this uh, basically big increase in rights consciousness, like maybe is a good way to put it. BLM, um, the greater visibility of trans people, all these things kind of happening, and it was sort of revved up by the crisis of the pandemic, um, and that is plus everything to do with the polarization over science. Democrats being, get your masks, get your vaccines, all this kind of stuff, kind of think about everybody else. And the Republicans, like, fuck all of that. Like, let's get the economy started again. Enough sitting in our homes. And my very much outsider's perceptions of this as a middle-aged man, but someone who has as young sons, that was a lot of stuff for young people to hear in a very short period of time, and in a time with a lot of suffering, right? A lot of bad things happening. And I'm not sure it meant it created right or left, but it created a lot of ideological volatility and kind of impulsiveness, like this kind of very bubbly sense of like, what the fuck, right? And that what the fuck kind of turned against Democrats, in a lot of ways, as we know, in 2024. One thing about the economy thing I always think is worth remembering with Trump. We know that Trump's all the razzmatazz basically is to the effect that Trump is a professional rich guy, right? Not even so much a businessman, as a professional rich guy who succeeds and has fancy things and knows how money works and all that kind of stuff. And then he becomes president, and like, the economy's doing great. We can talk about how rising inequality and all the all the things, but by conventional measures, the economy was quite good during his first administration until COVID. Um, and certainly the perception, fanned by all of his razzmatazz, was that it was good. But it's worth remembering it was good. And that's largely because he inherited a good economy. And then he did a big tax cut, which sort of gooses things a bit, runs the economy hard. So it's not that crazy that people think this. That, oh, he may be crazy, but he knows how to run the economy. Uh, at a certain level, it lines up. There's evidence, it is the ultimate example of correlation doesn't mean causation, but still, for most people and most of the time, it's good enough, right? Like, he'll come back and he'll correlate again. So I guess what this all brings me to is, it's not surprising to me that if he comes in and, like, pretty visibly for most people, like, wow, you came in and you, like, wrecked it. Like, what the fuck? Like, this isn't kind of like, oh, are these just the trends, or presidents don't have much effect in the economy? Like, no, like, you seem to have come in and, like, everything got shitty all of a sudden. That's going to jolt people, especially, I think, voters who, I think a lot of that shift among young voters was, you Democrats were talking a lot about, race and inclusion and language and all this stuff, and, like, let's just run the economy good. And Trump knows how to do that. He's a kind of a badass, and let's do it. And that has kind of hit, you know, that's a jolt when you see that. And frankly, we can come to this later, but that's kind of why I was surprised he did the tariffs thing, because the guy wants to be loved, and this is not generating love.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It makes no sense. I've said this on the pod before. I think the most compelling theory of why he's doing it is he likes, the entire world responding to him, and he likes the idea of like people sending, trade groups to negotiate with him and everything. But everything else, the way he's gone about it is just dumb. Like, if you wanted to kind of cut China out of the global economy, it, I think, would be pretty impossible, but at the very least, you would need to kind of band together with the other big countries and all do it together.
Yep.
But he's
Yep.
kind of flipped off every single country. So now, and this is having just crazy rundown effects, like I've heard stories about in Canada, in the various provinces, like people aren't making new deals with American vendors because it's too risky, right? And there's too much on top of the fact that people are pissed, kind of rightfully so.
Mhm.
Um, and then you have the fact that China is, manufacturing everything. And even though China wants to outsource some of that to other, smaller Asian countries, China can punish the United States, and punish in retribution. So the whole thing is, I'm almost surprised that the economic indicators are not worse yet. Like, it seems that people are kind of riding on this thing of like, well, he changes his mind all the time, he flip-flops all the time, not gonna go to kind of like DEFCON 4 until we're sure this sticks, which, yeah, sure, but we're talking like empty barges, right? Like shipping things not coming over on boats. And it's like all of this big macro supply stuff, it doesn't turn on a dime, right? Like you will have people ordering stuff in anticipation for, X, whether that be, let's say Halloween costumes, right? It's like stores are going to have to start making those orders now so the stuff gets in time for people to buy them. And if they're not doing that, because why would you, right? You order right now and maybe you have to pay a gajillion dollars in tariffs. And then if he ends the tariffs in a month, that was a pretty stupid idea, right? So you're in this weird stasis. But even, having the whole economy in like a pause, that has its own destruction. Like it's supposed to be kind of always moving. So, I've been thinking about this, and I listened to a podcast the other day with one Bloomberg guy said, Wall Street can be surprisingly unsophisticated about politics, right? That they sometimes like don't see things through the end of, the ramifications aren't immediately clear to them. And it could be a piece of it because I'm just like, why wouldn't you be totally concerned? Even if best case scenario today he comes out to the podium and he's like, forget the tariffs, that was dumb, I'm not doing that anymore. We already saw like all the hits that produce that people don't want to buy, treasuries anymore, and that the dollar is weak, and all the kind of ramifications of that, not to mention the
Mhm.
fact that who would ever kind of consider us like a reliable trading partner after this.
There was I heard from a reader, a fascinating, email, and I'm actually gonna see if, I'm gonna talk to this reader and see if we can edit it a bit to take out the identifying information. But in any case, this is a reader who owns a small manufacturing company, 50 to 100 employees, but they are the global leader in manufacturing a certain kind of heavy industrial thing, right? Okay. And and they've got some competitors, but they're the best one. Okay. And it is heavily an export business because it's this very it's this very needed thing, but it's not a dishwasher, right? You have to be in a specialized line of work. Okay. And in the last month, he has heard from his main buyers in China, in Germany, and from a few other countries saying, we need you to move to a different country. We can't purchase from you anymore. Um, and this isn't being driven by countries that are mad at the U.S. It is exactly what you just said, which is they're saying there's no price stability with your product. We don't know how much it's going to cost, and that is too. And in the details of this thing, there are competitors. They're not as good, and that's kind of recognized all around, but they're good enough, right? And you just can't be locked into a vendor that One day their price might be X, one day it might be 1.5x or 2x, and that's just, and so you've got this person, um like, move your company to another country, like, okay, that's this isn't like, kind of take your money out of treasuries and put it into sort of, euro bonds. This is hard. And so basically what this person told me is like, look, I now have to, I have two choices. I have to move the factory out of the country, which obviously means all your employees are out of, lose their jobs. Um, and he mentioned, kind of 90% of them are at least on the, as this person described to me, half the employees are sort of manufacturing, and the others are not clerical, but design and stuff like that. Or sell to sell to someone else, sell to a foreign buyer who can manage that, whatever. And I think that's how, it's funny. One of the things that, sort of in the nature of things, is that a lot of the stories focus on importers. But kind of part of the problem, as Trump sees it, and is true to some extent, is that we've got more importers than exporters, right? That gets you a trade deficit. But there are not no exporters. There's tons of exporters. And lots of them are in this situation. And that's bad for everybody, right? And in this particular person's anecdote, they make a very specialized thing. So it's a big decision for everybody if they're going to switch. But if you make like pigs or grain, everybody's got pigs and grain, right? I mean, you just switch. There's no, it, it's easy. So, to your earlier point, even if he changed everything today, there are only container ships, at least from China, coming from China in the last 1,000 miles, you know, kind of off the California coast. Behind that, there's nothing, from China. Not that all trade has shut down. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is kind of why, I did this post, which I assume most of you listening will have seen, where I basically said, not as a prediction, just I think Trump has already lost this big picture. Um, and Not a prediction, just I have this kind of doctrine as a person in news, fundamental honesty with readers. And so when I think something, I think I should share it, like just whatever. That was me sharing it. But the reason I think that is I think he's doing something domestically that is very similar to what he's doing internationally, which is you can't fight with everybody at once because you're going to lose that. That's not workable. And as Kate said, China's a big country. It would be difficult to really isolate China economically, but you can imagine another universe where Trump comes in and says, "Okay, we are instituting 50% tariffs on China," and he says to Europe and India and sort of other major economic powers, "Look, we're gonna tighten our relationship with you, but we need you to put up some trade barriers against China. And if you don't, we're not going to, chum up with you." And that's a very different proposition, right? Because the US is a big economy. You can't ignore what the US says. Um, and maybe that could work, at least to a limited extent. But this is not going to work. And in the same way, I don't think it is going to work. I got a lot of emails in response to that post, and one of the people sort of said what I think I was trying to say much more concisely, which is like, there's probably a way to turn this country into an autocracy. This is not it. This is not how you do it. You don't blow up the economy at the same time. That's not workable. And that's kind of It's kind of where I think we are.
It also has made me just wonder what's going to happen with the debt ceiling, because I think the prominent argument from those of us who thought that Democrats shouldn't have caved on the CR was, after that happened, you're like, okay, well, the next point of leverage is going to be the debt ceiling, right? And, Republicans are going to need Democratic votes, and, you should condition those votes on X, Y, and Z. Um, and I still think that, but it's bizarre how willing Trump is to just ruin the economy. Something that, as you said at the beginning of the episode, is not going to engender love. Like, it is much more likely to torpedo his presidency and, um, the fates of kind of congressional Republicans in particular. So but he doesn't care. Like, he's doing this thing of like short-term pain, long-term gain. It's going to work in the end, when there is any kind of coherent theory behind this at all. And then, you think about the debt ceiling and you're like, well, is this thinking just kind of going to permeate the rest of the party as well, where we already know they're willing to play chicken with the debt ceiling, right? That's not a new thing. But are they now going to be at the place of like, yeah, kind of fuck it, where let's just go all in and kind of see what happens. I mean, and I don't think that would happen, because if there's kind of one thing you can depend on from Democrats, it's an unwillingness to win the game of chicken. And I think in that case, I feel pretty confident Democrats would bail Republicans out, and Republicans probably know that, which is why capitulating on the CR has downstream negative effects for any later negotiations as well. But
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see, because I am curious to know about, are there any divides here? Like, congressional Republicans know that even if Trump's cult of personality is so strong that he can somehow survive tariff stuff and some amount of economic pain, that they do not enjoy the same people willing to kind of take a bullet for them, right? Like, they are riding his coattails in a lot of cases. And, these people who are running these small manufacturing companies might have less grace to give their random representative than they do the king of the movement. So I think it'll be an interesting juncture to see, are we going to have finally some kind of schism that's premised not on any ideological conviction or moral repugnance, but pure self-interest, in terms of, if the economy tanks, the party that did it is going to suffer, and I, the congresswoman from the 5th district, am not high enough in the pecking order to kind of avoid that bloodbath.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I started just, one of the many times when I finally had an epiphany about something that's completely obvious, that, oh, I think it was someone saying about, what do the approval numbers mean? What are blah, 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 blah. Trump is not going to be on the ballot again. So they don't directly have anything to do with him. And you can say he's going to be on the 2020, he's going to run in 2028. And I mean, this is like, people who have profoundly different lifestyles to me. If that works for you, I'm glad that's helping you through your life. I don't believe that. But again, that is who this is about. And we have also seen clearly that Trump consistently is able to outperform the polls, at least by a bit. It was very little in 2024, but the fact that it was even marginally in his favor, after two elections where polls had also underestimated him, is actually a big deal, right? But we have seen that does not apply when he is not on the ballot. And it also doesn't apply like they're off by 10 points, right? But yeah, that's what this is. That is what this is about. That people aren't for this. One place that we are seeing this is on Medicaid. Like, no one there are no Republicans denouncing Trump on Medicaid, and they're not, there is a whole choreography of MAGA. You never speak ill of the captain, but you just say, like, I don't think I can do this one thing, and I also love Trump so much. But you see stuff happening on the Medicaid front up on the Hill now, and this gets Kate knows this stuff better than I do, but it gets very intricate with the different sort of legislative things and everything, whether you put it in the budget and the reconciliation package and all this kind of stuff. But it's clear that there are a significant number of Republicans who are not on board for that. And in some ways that is more concrete because no one wants the economy to be bad, right? It's a different logic, but you can't go to war on everyone at once.
And we had this kind of funny little back and forth story yesterday, was Tuesday, where a story came out that Amazon was going to break out the increase in prices due to the tariff, in the kind of listed prices. And the White House freaked out, like freaked out. The press secretary was saying it's a hostile act, and it seems to transpire that like Amazon did a really pathetic kind of like, no, you misunderstood. And we're saying that this was only for like, I don't know, wholesale long haul trucker something. It was never going to be consumer facing. Like, don't worry, Mr. Trump, we would never do something like that to you. But I thought that was interesting because it was an indicator that Trump is not fully on board with people being able to kind of specify the economic misery that is a direct result from his policy. So he seems to be in this world where he thinks like maybe the economy gets bad for a while. He thinks he can just be like, well, the Biden economy sucked. What do you want me to do? It's going to take a while for my plans to fix it. And like hope everyone just kind of gets on board with that like delusion and is like, well, in the service of making America great again, I will suffer these pains and, trust the great leader and whatever, which seems completely untethered from reality. But I just thought that was an interesting vulnerability. Like he doesn't want consumers to be able to point to this as the source of their pain.
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely was a tell because yeah, they don't want to talk about that prices are going up and it's because of him. There's we always get in the way that Republicans always said that, Biden imported 50 million illegals and all this kind of stuff or all of these things that he wanted it to happen. And they kind of try to do that with Biden. He ramped up inflation. If they get a little more specific, they talk about, oh, he, too much spending, so that ramped up inflation. And there's at least a at least a theory there. I mean, the economists who I respect most think that that was a minimal driver of the inflationary surge. But in this case, you're like, he did it. Like he did it, and people said it was going to happen, and he did. So it is it's always hard to step back from the sort of the Trump reality distortion vortex. But are they worried? Like, how could they not be worried? Like he did this thing that is basically he turned up the inflation dial. Who's going to like that? Especially after God, you come out of an election where that is probably the most, one of the two or three most driving issues, discontent about the post-COVID economy and inflation. And then you make inflation go higher. Like it's still it still beggars belief. And people say, well, he ran on it. Of course he was going to do it. And yes, that makes a lot of sense, but he ran on the wall too, and they built like a few fences, and like that never happened, and he
Right.
just pretended it happened. And whether it is because it's smart if you were trying to impose a democracy to, as if an autocracy to keep the economy humming, or just because he likes to be loved. It 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 is it's wild, and I think yes, part of it is definitely everybody coming to him. He loves that. Some of it is some of this is hubris. People find a lot of ways to kind of convince themselves, well, this is how you build an autocracy. You tank the economy. Well, don't overthink it, guys. I'm not sure that's really how it works. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's,
Well, also,
my
isn't it
naive outlook.
historically you want the economy tanked so you can come in and be like, I am single handedly going to fix it? I'm not sure that equation works exactly the same way if you were like, yeah, I'll fix it and then break it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it is funny. One thing you said just made me think it's like, what are the biggest things he ran on, right? It's like fixing the economy and then like horrible immigration scapegoating stuff. And on the immigration front, I've been thinking a lot about this idea from this guy who writes in the Atlantic, and he wrote a piece about how scholars are calling what Trump is doing not an authoritarian government, not an autocracy, but something more specific called a
Oh,
patrimonialist
yes. Yes.
system,
Yes. Yep.
um, which I think it differentiates itself in a way that to me was really illuminating because in this patrimonialist system, it's more akin to like an old-fashioned monarchy where, you're kind of enriching your circle and people in your orbit, and it's very kind of pay to play and quid pro quo stuff. But at its heart, what kind of differentiates itself from the, quote unquote kind of great authoritarian governments is that, you think of Nazism, the bureaucracy is a huge part of it, right? Like it was a very kind of muscular administrative state to undergird the work of the authoritarian. That is not what Trump is doing at all, right? He is cutting the tendons of the administrative state, weakening the federal government, the better for kind of him and his allied oligarchs to scavenge, the kind of corpse of American democracy. But the downside of that kind of system is that it's not muscular enough to compete with other modern states, right? I mean, that's why it's this old-fashioned model. Like modern states need a kind of big functioning bureaucracy to do everything they have to have. And we're seeing that I think in the immigration stuff. Like that's why they're going all in on this kind of kidnap the Maryland man and laugh about how they're never going to send him back. They kind of have to do these really high profile, visceral, one off examples, clearly geared towards scaring immigrants into hiding, ideally scaring them out of the country kind of thing. But then you look at the kind of raw total numbers and they're lagging. Like they're lagging behind Biden. They're lagging behind Obama.
I
This is
think that
not the great mass deportation that he promised.
wasn't it that I think I saw this data point that his first 100 days have been fewer deportations than Biden's last 100 days. If it's not Biden's last 100 days, it's the average over 2024 or something like that. So but the point is, he is and there was a number of, Tom Homan, the kind of cockroach thug. I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of bad people in the Trump administration, but there are few people who have that kind of, right out of central casting, sort of like thug, predator kind of vibe to him. But in any case, he was out there. They're talking up the arresting the judge. And one thing he got asked about several times is like, you're behind Biden on deportations. And again, the precise time, whether it's the average for 2024 or the last 100 days, that's kind of not the point. But you're behind. You're somehow running behind Biden. How can that possibly be? And it's a funny. It's a sort of a a kind of funny, uncanny, awkward place for Democrats to be. They're like, Biden top deporter, dude. He rocked. It's not quite the applause line, but it does, to Kate's point, how is that happening? Right? I mean, that's that like how is that happening? You just keep the machine going and torque it up a little bit. You should be able to increase that. But that's the point. There's a reason why modern states have this elaborate machinery. There's a lot of stuff going on in a modern state. There's a lot of money a modern state needs to be. And that's why, look, you've got generations of sociologists and political scientists who all they study is the evolution of the state to be able to extract a significant amount of the economy in taxes because a modern state does a lot of shit, right? And to your point, that kind of like it certainly is good for Trump's ego, and it does create a real pathway to control. But Trump can't run the United States government. It's way, way too big. And the ideal thing for him is to sort of let the administrative state keep humming and just kind of jump in where he wants to come in and pull favors and bonk people here and there. But yeah, there are real limitations to you know what they're trying to do.
And what the guy who's writing about this is Jonathan Rausch, but what he pointed out as like the kind of weaknesses that scholars have associated that are inherent to this form of running a government is incompetence for the reasons we've already talked about, right? They can't meet the needs of a modern state. So things are going to fall apart and be embarrassing and not function well. And we're already seeing that ripple out from, the Doge cuts and stuff, right? Like
Mhm,
I saw a story
mhm.
the other day about some catastrophic slowdown at Newark Airport, and all the experts they talked to is like, this is going to be how it is. Like, this is, if you kind of fire people and wither the system, it's not going to function anymore, right? I mean, same with hollowing out the IRS and taking people off the phones at the Social Security Administration, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other weakness is corruption, right? This kind of system is inherently corrupt. I mean, we haven't even gotten into really on the show the whole crypto stuff, but it's an unbelievably brazen grift that's out there in the open. And this is just tangential, but I've just been thinking about these a lot. And I think the incompetency point is something Democrats are banking on, right? This is the whole James Carville thing of like, just shut up and let him run his own administration into the ground because, by some measure, as you say, he could have done very little, right? Accept a strong, robust economy, accept the administrative state and make his plays where he wants while the overall indicators are good, right? And he probably would have stayed pretty popular for a while, but he's
Mhm.
blowing all of that up, and just kind of rake stepping himself into the lowest popularity he's had. The corruption piece, I'm just a little like more hesitant about because it doesn't feel to me that the kind of he's a slimy businessman, he stiffs contractors, he had all these failed businesses, he's not that successful. I just feel like that stuff has never really stuck to him. That people like when he says this stuff about, if you pay taxes, you're an idiot, right? Like, I think they kind of think that that devil may care. I don't know. I think people just expect him to
I think
enrich
that
himself off the presidency.
I think that is I they absolutely do. It's sort of like, if you had I think it's sort of an example if you had, Bill Clinton could to a great extent uh skate with a lot of sexual scandals, right? Because kind of people knew even his greatest admirers knew that's kind of who he is. Whereas if you had seen Obama, like, wow, Obama had 3 girlfriends on the side in the White House, man, people would be like, what the fuck? Obama, what are you doing, man? Because like you just don't see that. Or Obama, like, you know, businessmen bringing in bags of money to get a special regulation, you'd just be shocked. Whereas no one's shocked. It's kind of part of Trump's brand. And I think to the extent that it works for him, one of the things you hear from a lot of Trump supporters is they know he's an asshole and they know he's kind of a bad guy in a way, but kind of like, I want an asshole looking out for me, or we need an asshole to kind of knock some heads, and that kind of stuff. I do think though, and again, this goes back to my point, whether I'm right or wrong, that things stick a lot more when you are losing popularity, right? Everything depends on the prism that people are looking through. And if everything seems to be going well, people, I mean, there was this guy, I think he passed away a few years ago, this guy, Buddy Cianci, who was the mayor of Providence, like for half of his life, basically. He was mayor as a young man. And then he actually went to jail for a few years. He came out, was mayor again. I think he was maybe went to jail after the second run. And anyway, I lived in Providence during um, his his second kind of stint as being mayor, and it was like everybody knew he was corrupt, right? But he was also a pretty good mayor, and he was like really. People hate me for this. Who kind of I look. I was just a grad student living in the town. I thought he was kind of entertaining. Um, I that was for me, that was just, yeah, of course, Buddy's, kind of crooked. That's kind of, that's his brand. And, people, if they think you're doing a good job, like, he's sort of, entertaining character and stuff like that. If they think you're not doing a good job, that starts looking worse. And again, it's sort of like, I think all of us realize, people who don't like Donald Trump get that the guy has a level of charm, and things kind of, and that is a very powerful thing in politics, and you don't have to agree with that, but you should be able to recognize it, because in the same way that I certainly don't compare the two men, but in the same way, it drove Republicans fucking crazy that they would come up with stuff that they thought would do in Bill Clinton. I mean, we caught you carrying on with an intern in the White House. We found physical evidence. Why are you still here? How is this happening? Right? Donald Trump has some of that hold on people, some of that charm that things bounce off. But the way that one of the ways that Bill Clinton survived the Lewinsky scandal is, it's not just that the economy was doing well, which it was in the late 90s. People thought he was doing a good job as president. And the way the sort of the public conversation evolved was sort of like, he's doing a good job. Why don't you guys just shut the fuck up? Enough. Yes, he's kind of slimy, but like, we kind of got that, and like, whatever. We don't want him to resign. That's how it played out. Um, you shouldn't tank the economy. And I'll say one other thing. What is showing up in these polls and is very meaningful to me, or significant to me, it's not just the economy. People are upset and scared about the reckless and illegal behavior. They don't like that. That is that is driving opposition to him. Um, you know, there you go.
So let's end. You mentioned the judge earlier. This is like kind of one of the most alarming stories going on right now. As you said, she's a Milwaukee Circuit judge, Hannah Duggan, who, and the facts here are weird and kind of blurry, but she had this guy in her court case up on battery charges. He did not have a record prior to that. She finds out that there are federal agents outside the courtroom who had not told her, given her a heads up that this was gonna happen, and she basically said, "Well, you need a warrant and you need to talk to the chief judge of the circuit." And I guess the chief judge told them there are certain places where you can arrest someone, but you can't, you can't go into a courtroom. It has to be in kind of the public areas of the courthouse. Um, and the narrative that, kind of Cash Patel is spreading is that basically she secreted him out like a secret stairway to try to avoid ICE. But even in the complaint, she you find out that the immigrant was on the elevator with the lawyer. An ICE person watched them go in and let them go. And then they got out of the courtroom, and then there was a foot race, and then they arrested him. So
Can I add
even,
one can I
yeah,
add one thing? I think my understanding is that the ICE person who watched actually jumped into the elevator.
right.
Is
And
that
rode
is
down
that
with them and didn't do
exactly.
anything.
Right, and then they chased and yes, as I didn't
Right.
just wanted to add that one thing.
So even this kind of narrative of like she shielded him from ICE is not that's not what happened, right? That's not even completely true. Um, and then of course you have the showmanship, right? Like when Trump was arrested, he wasn't frog marched out of his house in cuffs because
That's
well,
not how you do
people
it. Yeah.
recognized his stature and that he was not, a violent risk. So he was afforded all kinds of respect, brought in back entrances to the, the detention centers or whatever, to get his mugshot. Um, and kind of the latest on this now is that the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which has a liberal majority, suspended her. Um, there were no dissents from this. They said in the order, basically we have to do this to maintain kind of confidence in the courts, which I was kind of rocked when I first read that. But then you think of it in any other context in a normal administration, and you're like, well, that probably would happen even
Yeah.
before the kind of case has played out. Um, and that she has added Paul Clement to her legal team, which is funny because I have a joke at TPM that there's only one lawyer and it's Paul Clement, because I swear to God, like 75% of the cases I cover on totally different topics, he's there and not always on the
Mhm.
side you'd expect. And for
Yeah.
listeners who are not familiar, he was what, Solicitor General under W,
Yes, yes.
and is this kind of, big star conservative lawyer, but is not 100% of the time kind of on the side of cases you would expect. He's argued against the Trump administration on a few things. So, he's joining her legal team, and that's where things stand. And I don't know, I have to say, when I first saw this headline, that they arrested a sitting judge, I was like, well, that feels Rubicon Crossing y,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that is pretty scary. That is pretty something you're not accustomed to seeing in the United States.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is absolutely a, Rubicon crossing, red line, everything. And you have this, you have this ambiguity in the law that it is established law that or for the moment, that state and local authorities don't have to help federal authorities with ICE or actually anything else, but they obviously can't impede them. Although, you know, what is impeding that can get a little wiggly. To a certain extent, you could argue not helping is impeding. It kind of is, right? I mean, uh, yeah, this is they are, and this is an example. I mean, as you said, their inability to deport many people has made them focus more and more on high profile, aggressive actions meant to scare undocumented immigrants and to scare their opposition. And they clearly are looking for all these different ways to bring the separate sovereignties of the state of the individual states under their control. Uh, I think one thing to remember about this is that are they going to be on these facts? Are they going to be able to find 12 jurors who will find this woman guilty? I I doubt it. I really doubt it. Because even on the merits, the argument is very thin, right? I mean, like very, very thin. The action is at best ambiguous. And because it is an in the moment action, there's no way to bring in evidence of intent beyond what happened to be in the woman's mind at that moment. And that is that's a very hard case. Well, put it this way. The difficulty of making a case is sort of a a legally question. I'm saying get 12 jurors to convict. I don't think there's any way. Because the evidence is so small, but I don't think people want to convict judges. And again, in a jury trial, it's not a matter of getting a majority. You need people to be unanimous, and this is you know the legal world has changed a lot of the definitions of why we have juries, but this is why juries came into existence, because you want people from your area to say, okay, yeah, we think this is legit, right? And I really think this is going to end up being like what you saw in the late 1850s in fugitive slave trials in the North. They couldn't convict anybody. People did not want to. These the ones I'm talking about are whites who were helping slaves get away, or were uh, we're blocking state or federal authorities from capturing and sending slaves back to the South. They couldn't get convictions. People didn't want to do it. I think that's what's going to happen here. I don't think people, I you know, I don't think people like this, and I certainly don't think you are going to get a unanimous juries here. I think that's kind of, you're operating at the limits of what you can of how you can bend things. And yes, you can call out the insert, you can do, in theory, you can do all sorts of things, but that is why tanking the economy at the same time is a really bad idea. Because yeah, you can in theory do all sorts of things, but you need people to do them for you. You need some public support for doing those things. So I don't think it is very scary. Um, I think it's going to break down.
This was kind of the driving point of that foreign policy piece I read at the beginning of the term by two scholars who were talking about a competitive autocracy and saying that as one of their kind of like, it was super bleak piece, but in one of the shining silver lining areas, they say, strong men are hugely dependent on public will. And, one of them who has 50% approval is just going to get away with way more stuff than someone who has 30% approval. And I think that's why I haven't liked the kind of complacency that goes along with the whole James Carville, like, just wait it out thing, because this plummet in popularity is directly tied to public will, right? Like, it's tied to people getting upset, but it's tied to protests, right? It's tied to not running away from immigration on the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case and changing people's minds about it, right? Like, making what Trump thought was his most winning argument into a weakness for him. Like, that's all predicated on how normal people react to this stuff, just everyday Americans. So, like you say, they're going to do these gambits because for obvious reasons, right? They want to scare law firms into not opposing them. They want to scare universities into not opposing them. They want to scare judges into not opposing them. But rigorous opposition, when they try those things, makes it higher risk for them to do, more of a gamble, right? And as you say, when you've got a perhaps looming recession handcrafted by the president in the background, that all goes into the stew, and that makes it harder for them to do these, I guess you only cross the Rubicon once, but on all these different fronts.
Yeah, I I think that I think that's absolutely right. And one of the things about that Carville essay, whereas he or opinion piece, where as you said, he said, kind of just kick back. He's burning the house down. Let him burn it down. Um, I always what is interesting to me about that argument is that it is a highly notional argument. And here's what I mean by that. First of all, there's this one argument is kind of like, well, if we block too much of his stuff, it'll be a mixed picture, and the midterm won't go great. Well, you're not going to block a lot of his stuff. You should try to block everything. You're only going to succeed a few times. So, to a certain extent, this whole kind of like, should we try to stop him? Should we not? The moral quandary. It's not much of a quandary because he's going to do plenty of stuff. The other point is, you as James Carville, influencer, kind of semi-retired strategist, you can convince some senators and you can convince some editorialists, but you're still going to have a public who's going to be really upset about stuff, and they're not, and their motivations and actions and drives are not in this second or third order calculus. How mad should I be about this? About the ag research center near my farm being shut down, or this dude being sent to a gulag in El Salvador? Should I be really mad, or should I not be so mad? And then we'll do. But people don't feel that way, and politicians and elites of all sorts can't aren't in as much control as they think. They can't just say, "Oh, it turns out everybody's really fucking mad," but we got a plan here. It doesn't work that way. So, it's again, that is a notional argument among elite influencers. And I'm not bad-mouthing elite influencers. I mean, I'm a low-level one myself, but we should all be sort of conscious of the limits of what we actually have any say in, for lack of a better word.
And on that note,
all right, 100 days. There it is.
100
And with
days.
100
A
days,
long 100 days.
it has been. You've had all those articles where they say just 1,357 days left, or whatever
I know, it makes you want to kill yourself.
Or they say, or another one I saw was like, we're through 6%.
Oh my God. Just keep it to yourself. It's
exactly,
we don't need to know.
Exactly. All right. I think that's it for this episode. Anything else?
See you next week.
All right. Later, folks.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.